Good evening. Today, my guest is the president of the International Association of Genocide Scholars, Melanie O'Brien. Good evening, Dr. O'Brien. Welcome to Armenia. And what are your expectations from the Global Forum Against the Crime of Genocide, and what key outcomes do you hope it will achieve?
The wonderful thing about this event that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Armenia puts together is that it brings together people who they all work in the same area. They work on genocide prevention, punishment, and education, but they come from different professions. Here we bring together people from government, people from the UN, people from academia like myself, people from NGOs, even people from the corporate sector. And this is what makes this event so unique. I attend a lot of conferences, but generally those are academic conferences. So to come to this event where we get to network with people who are all working for this same purpose, but essentially in fields where we don't normally get to come together, that is a true advantage of this event. And it is just wonderful that the Armenian government really brings all these people together from all around the world to be able to do that, with the aim that we can meet each other, we can network, we can talk about the work that we're doing, and hopefully in the future collaborate on projects related to atrocity prevention.
And in your opinion, what are the main challenges the international community faces in preventing genocide today?
Obviously, there are a lot of challenges. I think state will is one of them. So the willingness of states to actually enforce international law, because we do have the law. This comes up a lot where people question whether international law is really sufficient, whether it's doing its job, but we do have the law there. It's just the willingness of states to implement it. We have this fantastic and important convention, the Genocide Convention, which says that states have the obligation to prevent and to punish genocide. It's just about getting states to actually comply with that obligation. I think that's the biggest challenge in the world at the moment. And not only getting states to implement that obligation, but to do so consistently and without political concerns. So applying the Genocide Convention consistently to all perpetrator states, regardless of political affiliations.
And how do you see the role of the International Association of Genocide Scholars in promoting global recognition of genocides that may not have received widespread attention?
One of the interesting things about the International Association of Genocide Scholars is that we are made up of hundreds of scholars from all around the world who work on different atrocity contexts, from history or whether current events. And because of that spread, we have people who are working on events, on atrocity situations that aren't necessarily front and center in the media. I mean, as an example, thinking about Artsakh, about Nagorno-Karabakh, there are scholars in our association who are working on this issue, even though that is not something that has been front and center of the media in the same way that other events are. So I think the role of scholars is really important, because we can be working away in the background, researching into what is going on, what is the characterization of the crimes, what is the history of this event. We have scholars from all different fields. We have criminologists, lawyers, historians, anthropologists, sociologists, people who work in memory studies, people who work on tech issues. So because of this variety, people look at a whole different range of situations, whether historical or current. And I think that's one of the advantages of scholars, and bringing scholars into the practical side of this work as well.
Dr. O'Brien, you talked about the topic of Nagorno-Karabakh, the research going on the topic of Nagorno-Karabakh. Can you just give some details on research?
So there are a few, and I say us because I am one of them. So there are a few of us who are working on issues such as, for example, accountability. So those of us who are in legal research are looking at what are the avenues for accountability under transitional justice. So for example, Elisenda Calvet-Martinez is looking at the transitional justice options. For example, things like a Truth and Reconciliation Commission or fact-finding commissions. I'm looking at the international criminal law solutions for that. What can the International Criminal Court do, for example? Then we have other scholars such as Yerevan's own Suran Manukyan, who is looking at the broader context of genocide in Nagorno-Karabakh and things like the textbooks, what is written in the history textbooks in Azerbaijan. So there's actually quite a variety of people that are working on it. Admittedly, most people are Armenian scholars, but there are a few of us who are not Armenian who are also looking into this as well.
And Dr. O'Brien, how important is public education about genocide in preventing such atrocities in the future?
Education is a key component of prevention, and it can start at quite a young age. I'm not talking about educating 10-year-olds about genocide per se, but you can start at a young age with concepts such as acceptance and tolerance and learning about differences between people, and that being actually a wonderful part of life and not something to be feared. So these kinds of things actually, even though you may not directly and immediately connect them to the idea of genocide, they are connected to genocide. So education starts at a young age, and then of course as people get older, older students in high school can learn directly about history and learn about genocides and what happened. And that is really important for people to think, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be that type of person. But I think what's really key when educating about genocides is to also talk about the upstanders. Talk about the people who rescued victims, the people who stood up against genocidal regimes, because I think we need to teach people how to be upstanders when it does happen to them and their community.
And Armenia has a unique historical context as the site of the Armenian genocide. What lessons can be drawn from Armenia's experience for global genocide prevention?
In terms of thinking about the Armenian genocide, we're talking about more than 100 years ago, but the lessons are that it's still relevant today, and that non-recognition of the genocide, which is the case in many countries, including my own country, Australia, which I hope will change in the future, but non-recognition plays into Turkey's denial that what happened in 1915 was genocide. And that has ongoing impact in terms of the ability of the Armenian people to heal. And I think what it teaches us is that without accountability, which includes recognition, without accountability, there isn't an ability for the generations after even to heal from these kinds of genocides. And it teaches us how important that kind of thing is: accountability, recognition. So whether or not that's in a courtroom, it may be, it may not be. But that's the same thing. So when we have genocides happening today, we need to act on them. And we don't want to be here after another genocide 100 years later again in the same position that the Armenian people are in today.
And Dr. O'Brien, the term genocide is sometimes used in discussions about the Palestine-Israel conflict from a scholarly perspective. Do you believe this term applies in this context? Why or why not?
In thinking about what's happened in Palestine, in particular in Gaza, since the 7th of October, the actions on the ground and the terminology that applies to it certainly can be said to have evolved. There were scholars who very soon after the 7th of October were talking about a genocide taking place in Gaza. What we can definitely say for sure is that war crimes and crimes against humanity are going on and have been going on since October. However, thinking about the term of genocide, even if you didn't think it applied, say in November last year, at this point in time, it has become certain that we can say that there is genocide going on in Palestine with the number of deaths, but particularly I want to draw attention to the starvation and the denial of food and the denial of healthcare and the denial of access to water, all of which we see as key components in genocidal processes, because the concept of starvation, so not only is that outlawed under the laws of war, but when we look at genocide, starvation plays a key role in carrying out the goal of genocidaire, which is the destruction in whole or in part of a group. And the reason it plays a key role is that starvation is what we could say an easy way to eliminate a people, because inevitably people are going to die from starvation. And that's what we're seeing happening on the ground. We are seeing starvation levels now. And I think once you get to that, it is just undeniable that that is the goal. You know, if you are denying people food, water, and healthcare and medicines, then your goal is clearly to eliminate that population in whole or in part.
As for you, what can individuals, organizations, and governments do to foster a more proactive approach to genocide prevention and ensure that never again is not just a slogan?
It's a really challenging question. And, you know, this concept of never again always comes up. And it is a source of great frustration, isn't it? Never again has been said so many times. You know, Rwanda in 1994, the following year, Srebrenica, and it continues today. So how, you know, there are just so many levels, and I think it goes from the individual level all the way up to the state level. You know, states really need to implement their international law obligations and do so consistently and without political considerations. If you take that all the way down to an individual level, you as an individual have a government that you elected, hopefully. Obviously, not all people are lucky enough to have the right to vote. But for those that do, I always encourage people to lobby their own representatives, lobby their politicians, lobby their foreign ministers and their prime ministers or presidents to tell them what they as constituents want their government to do, that they want their government to stand up for what's right, to comply with their international law obligations, and to take specific actions when it comes to current situations on the ground, even if it's not in their own country. So I think the individual has quite a strong role to play, because in states that are lucky enough to have democracy, they are the ones who elect the politicians. And the politicians supposedly have to do what their constituents want. So I think we should never underestimate the power that each of us as an individual voter have, for those of us who are lucky enough to have the vote.
Thanks for the interview, Dr. O'Brien.
Thank you for having me.
Today I have talked to the president of the International Association of Genocide Scholars, Dr. Melanie O'Brien. Thanks for watching us.